Never cheat if you think you're the one with the worst secret in the marriage. Because I learned the hard way that someone else can be living an entirely different life while sleeping next to you every night. I'm not telling this story to excuse what I did. I messed up. I crossed a line I swore I never would. But what my wife was hiding made my worst mistake look small, almost laughable by comparison. And I didn't find out until it was already too late. I need to start a little before everything exploded, because from the outside, my life looked solid, stable, boring in that comforting middle-class way. I'm 39, I work in logistics, not glamorous, but it pays the bills. My wife, Laura, is 37. We'd been married 11 years. No kids yet. Not because we didn't want them, but because timing always felt off. First it was money, then careers, then the pandemic, then next year. There was always a reason. We lived in Ohio, just outside Columbus. A beige house in a beige neighborhood. Lawns trimmed, trash cans rolled out on Tuesdays. Neighbors who waved but never really knew your name. Laura worked in medical sales. That meant travel, lots of it. Conferences, regional meetings, client visits. I didn't love how often she was gone, but I told myself this was what ambition looked like. She was good at her job, better than good. She brought in more money than I did some years, and I was proud of her for that. At least I told myself I was. The truth is, the distance crept in quietly. Not with screaming matches or slammed doors, just gaps, empty space. She'd come home from trips tired and distracted. Conversations turned into summaries. Intimacy became scheduled, then rare, then awkward. We stopped laughing the way we used to. When I reached for her in bed, sometimes she'd flinch, just a little, like I'd startled her. I asked if she was okay. She always said yes. I asked if something was wrong between us. She said no, just stressed. Work was brutal. Her boss was demanding. The travel was exhausting. I believed her. Or maybe I wanted to. About 2 years ago, I met Rachel. She was new at work. Accounting department, divorced, early 30s, sharp sense of humor. We started talking during lunch breaks, nothing dramatic. Complaining about spreadsheets, joking about bad coffee. She listened when I talked. Really listened. When I mentioned Laura's travel schedule, Rachel joked that at least I had the house to myself. I laughed, but something in me tightened. It felt good to be seen. I'm not proud of how fast it escalated. 1 drink after work turned into 2. 2 turned into a habit. We started texting. Memes at first. Then personal stuff. Then things I should have shut down. I told myself it wasn't cheating because it wasn't physical. Then I told myself it wasn't cheating because Laura was never around. Then I told myself I deserved something that felt warm and easy. The first time Rachel kissed me, I froze. The second time, I didn't. The affair lasted 4 months. No love declarations, no plans to leave anyone, just stolen hours and the illusion that I was still desirable. I lived in constant low-grade panic, deleting messages, lying about overtime, inventing errands. Every time Laura smiled at me, guilt punched me in the gut. I was already looking for a way out of the affair when everything started to unravel. It happened on a random Tuesday. Laura was supposed to be in Chicago for a 3-day conference. She kissed me goodbye that morning, rolled her suitcase out the door, and texted me a heart emoji from the driveway. Same routine as always. Around noon, I realized she'd forgotten her iPad. I almost didn't think anything of it. She forgot stuff sometimes, but when I picked it up to charge it, it lit up with notifications, not work emails, messages, a name I didn't recognize. Miss you already? Another message followed, counting down until tonight. My stomach dropped so fast I had to sit down. I know how this sounds. The irony isn't lost on me. The cheater discovering suspicious messages on his wife's device. If this were a movie, I'd laugh at the hypocrisy. But in that moment, all I felt was cold fear. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But I did. The messages weren't explicit. That almost made them worse. Familiar, intimate, inside jokes, plans that assumed a shared life, references to places I'd never heard of. A city name jumped out at me. Phoenix. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Work contact. Old friend. Something. But the timestamp said she'd been texting him while sitting across from me on the couch the night before. When Laura called that evening to say she'd landed, I answered like nothing was wrong. My voice sounded fake even to my own ears. She talked about flight delays and hotel check-in. I asked which hotel she was at. She hesitated. The Marriott by the convention center, she said. I opened the iPad again while she talked, scrolled, found a message from earlier that day. Can't wait to be back home with you at the house. Home, not our house. The words felt wrong, off. I asked her to FaceTime me. She said she was exhausted and wanted to shower. She promised she'd call in the morning. She didn't. That night, I barely slept. My guilt about Rachel twisted into something else entirely. Paranoia, anger, dread. I kept replaying little moments from the last year. The sudden interest in a different bank account. The mail she'd started picking up herself. The way she'd changed her passwords and laughed it off as company policy. By morning, I knew something was deeply wrong. I confronted Rachel that day and ended it. No drama, no excuses. I told her I needed to fix my marriage. She didn't argue. She just nodded, like she'd been expecting it. Laura came home 2 days later. She hugged me tight at the airport. Too tight. Like she was holding on. I asked her straight out if there was someone else. She looked me dead in the eyes and said no. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the seed had been planted, and it was growing fast. Over the next week, I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Phone always face down, calls taken in the garage, packages shipped to a P.O. box she said was for work samples. And the travel, God, the travel, never slowing down, never lining up with the stories she told. One night, after she fell asleep, I went back to the iPad. That's when I found the document folder. Scans, PDFs, legal-looking forms. And right there, in black and white, was my wife's name, followed by a different last name, and the word spouse, not mine. That was the moment everything I thought I knew about my life cracked open. I didn't know it yet, but my affair, the thing I'd been torturing myself over, was just a footnote compared to what Laura had been doing for over a year. And the worst part? She hadn't just been cheating on me. She'd been married. I stared at that document until the words stopped making sense, like my brain was trying to protect me by refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. Laura's full legal name, a different last name, a marriage certificate issued in Arizona, dated 14 months ago. 14 months. I remember whispering, "That's not possible," out loud to an empty bedroom, like the walls might argue back. I scrolled slowly, my hands shaking. There were more files. Utility bills, a lease agreement, a joint checking account statement, all in the same city, Phoenix, all addressed to her and the same man. His name was Mark. I didn't recognize it at all. This wasn't some fantasy. This wasn't a fling. This was a second life, organized and documented, sitting quietly on an iPad she forgot to take with her. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't confront her either. Not yet. I needed to understand what I was looking at, because my mind kept reaching for softer explanations. Identity theft, mistake, work-related legal nonsense, anything that didn't mean my wife had legally married someone else while still married to me. The next morning, I called in sick. For the first time in years, my job felt irrelevant. I spent hours going through everything on that device. Emails I'd never seen. Photos I wasn't meant to find. There she was, Laura, standing in a small backyard I didn't recognize, smiling in a sundress, her arm wrapped around a man I'd never met. He was about my age. Dark hair, confident posture, the kind of guy who looked like he belonged wherever he stood. In one photo, they were cutting a cake together. Not a birthday cake, a wedding cake. I had to run to the bathroom and throw up. When I came back, I noticed something that made it even worse. She looked different in those photos. Lighter, happier. Like the version of her I fell in love with years ago. The version I'd been missing. That hurt more than the betrayal. By the time Laura got home from work that evening, I had a plan. Or at least the outline of one. I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to scream. I needed the truth, and I knew if I went in swinging, I'd only get half answers and lies. She walked in like it was any other night, dropped her bag, asked what I wanted for dinner. I asked her to sit down. She smiled, but there was something tight behind it, like she already knew this moment was coming. I asked her one simple question. Is there something you need to tell me? She paused. Not long, but long enough. Then she shook her head. No. Why? That was the moment I realized how deep this went. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't scrambling. She was committed to the lie. So I slid the iPad across the table. Her face drained of color. For a few seconds, she just stared at it. Then she closed her eyes and leaned back in the chair, like someone finally allowed to stop running. I can explain, she said quietly. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unreal, because I can explain felt like the smallest sentence in the world for what I was holding in my hands. I asked her how long. She told me 1.5 years. I asked her who he was. She told me his name. Mark, a consultant she met at a conference. One conversation turned into another, then another, then something that got out of control. I asked her why. She cried then. Real tears. She said she felt invisible here, that our marriage had turned into routines and silence, that in Phoenix she felt like a different person, a braver one, a happier one. I asked her why she married him. She looked at me and said something I don't think I'll ever forget. Because it felt real. That sentence broke something in me. She told me she planned to end one of the marriages. Eventually. She hadn't decided which one yet. Let that sink in. I was her husband of 11 years, and I was apparently one option on a list. I told her about Rachel. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted to hurt her back. Maybe because I wanted the moral scales to feel less tilted. She flinched, but only for a second. Then she nodded, like it confirmed something she already believed. I knew it, she said softly. That made me angry in a way I can't fully describe, like she'd already written me into a story where her betrayal was justified. I asked her if Mark knew about me. She said yes. I asked if he knew she was still married. She said yes. I asked if he knew she was legally married to him while living with me. She hesitated. Then she said no. That's when I realized something else. I wasn't the only victim here. Mark thought he was married to a woman who traveled for work. I was married to a woman who traveled for a life. That night ended with her sleeping on the couch and me sitting in the dark, realizing that my affair, the thing I'd been drowning in guilt over, was nothing compared to the quiet, methodical deception she'd been living for over a year, and I hadn't even begun to untangle the legal mess she'd created. Because the next step wasn't just emotional. It was going to involve lawyers, lies, and a man in another state who had no idea his wife wasn't who he thought she was. And when I finally decided to reach out to him, everything went from broken to explosive. I didn't contact Mark right away. For 2 days, I walked around my own house like a ghost, replaying Laura's words over and over. It felt real. I was going to end one of them. Every sentence sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced explaining this to herself long before I ever found out. She kept trying to talk, apologizing, crying, telling me she was confused, that she loved me, that she loved him, that she didn't mean for it to go this far. She said Phoenix was an escape, that being married there made her feel anchored, like someone finally chose her fully. I asked her how she managed the logistics, the time, the lies. She told me she rearranged her work travel so she could spend entire weeks in Arizona. She told her company she was relocating part-time for territory expansion. They didn't question it because she was hitting her numbers. She said she rented the house with Mark under the excuse of being closer to clients. She said the bank account was simpler for shared expenses. I asked her if she ever felt guilty. She said yes. I asked when. She said, sometimes, when I leave. That answer made me stop asking questions. The third night, I slept in the guest room. Not out of anger, out of fear. Fear that if I stayed close to her, I'd cave. Fear that the familiar weight of her body next to mine would blur my resolve. On the fourth day, I did something that scared me almost as much as the discovery itself. I Googled my wife. Not casually, thoroughly. And there it was. A wedding announcement on a small Arizona venue website. Laura and Mark. Smiling photos. Comments from people congratulating them. Friends. Co-workers. People who thought this was the start of a normal life. One comment stopped me cold. So happy you finally found your forever. I realized then that Laura hadn't just lied to me. She'd rewritten herself. I sat at my desk and drafted a message to Mark at least 10 times before sending anything. I deleted drafts that sounded angry, drafts that sounded desperate, drafts that sounded like a prank. I didn't know how to tell another man that the woman he married was already married to me. Eventually, I sent something simple. Hi, you don't know me, but I think we need to talk about Laura. Please call me. He didn't respond that day. The next morning, I got a call from an Arizona number while I was at work. I stepped outside, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Hello? I said. There was a long pause. Then a man's voice, calm, confused. Who is this? I told him my name. I told him I was Laura's husband. He laughed, just once, short and sharp. That's not funny, he said. I told him it wasn't a joke. I asked where he was sitting. He said he was in his kitchen. I told him to sit down. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then his breathing changed, slower. He asked me what I meant. I told him everything. About Ohio, about our marriage, about the legal paperwork, about the dates. He didn't interrupt me, not once. When I finished, he said very quietly, "She told me you were her ex." I closed my eyes. He said she told him the divorce was messy, that I was controlling, that I wouldn't let go, that the paperwork was almost done. I asked him if he knew she was still living with me. He said no. I asked him if he knew she went home to another man after kissing him goodbye. He said no again, but this time his voice cracked. He asked me if I was sure, so I sent him the documents. There was a long pause. Then I heard something hit a table. Hard. He started swearing. Not at me. At her. At himself. At the situation. He told me she cried on their wedding night and said it was happy tears. He told me she talked about having kids soon. He told me she picked out baby names. I told him she said the same things to me years ago. That's when something shifted between us. The anger wasn't pointed anymore. It was shared. We stayed on the phone for over an hour. Two strangers bound together by the same person, trading details like survivors comparing injuries. He told me he'd noticed her distance sometimes, her sudden need for privacy, her reluctance to introduce him to certain people. I told him I noticed the same things. He asked me what I planned to do. I told him I didn't know yet. He said, "Neither do I." But then he said something that made my chest tighten. "I need proof. I need to see her reaction when she can't lie her way out of it." That's when the idea formed. Not revenge, not drama, truth. We agreed not to confront her separately. Not yet. We agreed to talk again after we'd both had time to think. Before we hung up, he asked me one last question. "Did you love her?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said yes. He said, "Me too." When I went back inside, Laura was waiting for me. She asked where I'd been. I told her I needed air. She nodded, like she didn't want the answer anyway. That night, she tried to crawl into bed with me. I stopped her. Not with anger, with distance. She looked hurt, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just the loss of control. Because now, for the first time, the story wasn't just hers anymore, and the next move would force her to face both lives at once. If you think the truth ends things cleanly, wait until you see what happens when both husbands step into the same room. We didn't rush it. That surprised me the most. After everything came out, after the shock wore off and the anger settled into something heavier, Mark and I didn't jump straight to confrontation. We talked. A lot. Late-night calls where neither of us could sleep, comparing timelines, filling in blanks Laura had carefully erased, and the picture that formed was worse than either of us expected. She hadn't just bounced between two lives randomly. She'd scheduled them. Ohio was stability, history, safety. Arizona was freedom, novelty, control. She told Mark she couldn't move yet because of work obligations. She told me she couldn't slow down at work because of career momentum. Each lie supported the other. Perfectly. Mark sent me photos of the house they shared. Laura had helped pick the paint colors, bought furniture, decorated a guest room she said was for visiting family. That room, apparently, was for the future she hadn't decided on yet. I sent him photos of our house, the same wedding photos still hanging on the wall, the Christmas ornaments with both our names, the life she'd never officially left. At one point, Mark said something that stuck with me. She didn't just cheat. She duplicated herself. That was exactly it. After about a week, we agreed it was time. We planned the meeting together. Neutral ground, a hotel conference room halfway between us, rented under Mark's name. No shouting, no ambush. Just the truth, delivered at once, with nowhere for her to run. Laura thought she was coming to couples counseling. That part still makes my stomach twist. I told her I'd scheduled something to help us communicate better. She seemed relieved, even hopeful. She dressed carefully that morning, like she wanted to look sincere, like she wanted to be forgiven. When we walked into the room and Mark was already there, everything stopped. Time, breath, color. Her face went completely blank, like someone had unplugged her. For a second, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark stood up slowly. He didn't yell. He didn't move toward her. He just said her name, not the name I knew her by, the Arizona one. She looked at me then, panic finally breaking through the mask. "You told him?" she asked. I said, "No, I showed him." She tried to talk, to explain, to separate the narratives like she always had, but it didn't work when both audiences were in the same room. Mark asked her how long she planned to keep lying. She said she didn't know. I asked her which marriage she was going to end. She said she couldn't answer that yet. That was the moment Mark laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. "You already ended both," he said. "You just didn't want to admit it." She cried then. Loud, messy sobs. She apologized to both of us, switching tone depending on who she looked at. She said she loved us both, that she never meant to hurt anyone, that she was scared of choosing wrong. I realized something as I watched her unravel. She wasn't afraid of losing us. She was afraid of losing control. Mark pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. Inside were copies of the documents I'd sent him. Marriage certificate, lease, bank statements. He told her he'd already spoken to a lawyer. So had I. The legal consequences alone were staggering. Bigamy, fraud, financial entanglements she'd never untangled cleanly. She kept saying it was a mistake, that it just happened. Nothing about this just happens. She reached for my hand. I stood up. I told her about Rachel, not to hurt her, but to clear the last illusion between us, to make sure there was no moral high ground left to argue over. She looked devastated. Then she said something that confirmed everything. "At least you only loved one person." Mark and I exchanged a look. Not triumph, understanding. We walked out together. She stayed behind, alone with her choices for the first time in over a year. In the weeks that followed, everything moved fast. Lawyers, paperwork, calls I didn't answer, messages I didn't read. Laura tried to salvage something, anything, but there was nothing left to salvage. Mark filed for an annulment. I filed for divorce. The house felt empty, even before she moved out. And yet, lighter. Because once the truth finally lived in the open, there was no more guessing. No more gaslighting myself into believing a half-life was normal. But the hardest part wasn't the paperwork. It was realizing that the woman I married didn't disappear. She was never exactly who I thought she was to begin with. By the time the paperwork was finished, the chaos was gone. But the silence was loud. Laura moved out within a week of the meeting. Most of her things were already gone anyway. Turns out it's easy to disappear when you've been practicing for over a year. I watched her load the last box into her car, standing on the porch like a stranger watching someone else's life end. She didn't cry that day. Neither did I. The divorce process was oddly calm. No screaming lawyers, no dramatic court scenes, just signatures, disclosures, and the quiet understanding that there was nothing left to argue over. When trust dies that completely, there's nothing to fight for, only things to untangle. Mark and I stayed in contact for a while. Not because we became friends, but because we were the only two people who really understood what had happened. He got his annulment. Clean slate, legally at least. Emotionally, not so much. One night, a few months after everything was finalized, Laura called me. I almost didn't answer. Her name sat on my screen like a relic from another life. For a long moment, I just stared at it, feeling nothing. Then curiosity won. She sounded smaller, quieter, like someone who'd run out of places to hide. She told me she was in therapy, that she'd lost her job, that Mark hadn't spoken to her since the annulment, that some friends had cut her off completely once the truth spread. Then she asked me something I didn't expect. "If you could go back," she said, "would you forgive me?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because I needed to be honest. I told her no. Not with anger. Not with spite. Just truth. I told her forgiveness wasn't the issue anymore. That I'd already let go of the rage. That I didn't wish her harm. But forgiveness doesn't rebuild reality. It doesn't erase choices, and it doesn't turn someone back into who you thought they were. She cried then. Real crying. Not the controlled kind. The exhausted kind. Before we hung up, she said one last thing. "I think I was running from myself," she said. Maybe she was. But I learned something important in the wreckage of all this. You can be imperfect and still honest. You can make mistakes and still face them. My affair was wrong. I own that. I'll always own that. But what shattered me wasn't infidelity alone. It was the realization that the person I trusted most had turned our life into a stage and everyone else into an audience. These days, my house feels different, quieter, simpler. I sold it eventually, moved closer to the city, new routines, new faces, no secrets. I'm not rushing into anything, not trying to win the breakup or prove I'm okay. I am okay. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. If someone can live two lives without flinching, the problem was never that you didn't see it sooner. It's that they were willing to become someone else entirely.